Welcome to MAP, the bi-weekly market access podcast hosted by me, Dr. Stefan Walzer. I am the innovator of Market Access 4.0 and a health economist by training and working in the fields of market access, reimbursement, pricing, and health economics since 2004. Discover Market Access 4.0 and unveil the future with our innovative solutions. Max Insights, our fast and easy AI-based reimbursement planning platform. Dobo, our new revolutionizing way of creating reimbursement dossiers across the globe with the first and only dossier writing AI bot. Cubo, our new AI-based objection handling platform. And Waffle, train with Waffle's virtual reality genius in an immersive environment and with an AI-based counterpart. We are Market Access 4.0. So check out our website, marketaccess4-0.com. And now let's dive into the current discussions, processes, and trends in market access across the globe. Welcome back to another episode of Market Access Podcast. I think today we're back to Switzerland. So we're diving again into the details and the current kind of discussions in the Swiss healthcare market, of course, especially when we discuss about reimbursement, pricing, market access. Today I have a great guest. I have Petra Erni with me. She's a great Swiss expert, but I think best would be probably, Petra, if you could introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Stefan, for having me here. I'm really glad to be with you. And I'm a trained pharmacist. I worked in the public pharmacies as well as many years in the pharmaceutical industry. First in regulatory and medical roles, and then I switched to commercial responsibilities for GP products, but also for specialist products. And in the end, I was working for GlaxoSmithKline in the oncology and critical care business unit. I was heading the department. And after my industry experience, I spent a short period at the Federal Office of Public Health in the medicines division. That said, I was assessing pricing and reimbursement dossiers for medicines. Basically, for family reasons, I then decided to start and run my own company. I got self-employed, and I've been doing this for several years now, supporting companies in the Swiss market access environment, supporting dossier writing, also consulting negotiations with the Federal Office of Public Health and all kind of requests and projects around market access, but focusing on Switzerland. So this has become quite challenging in the past years, but that's what it makes it interesting. And actually it never gets boring because there are lots of changes. And there is quite a huge pressure on prices and costs, not only in Europe, but also in Switzerland. But that's what makes my life challenging and my work especially interesting.
Absolutely. And I think as probably everybody has now just heard, I think you probably bring the best of both sides into the discussion, one from the pharma experience and the other one, of course, as well from the payers experience, which I think ended as well into what you currently do. But maybe before we delve a bit into some of the details, and you mentioned already, let's say, cost pressure, etc., for people who are not that familiar with the Swiss drug reimbursement process, could you briefly walk us through and maybe also highlight a bit what makes Switzerland unique in this regard?
Yeah, sure. Switzerland, you might know, we have a two-step process. We have our own regulatory agency with Swissmedic. So we do our own drug assessment to get marketing authorization. And as soon as we have a preliminary decision, a positive preliminary decision from Swissmedic, we can submit for pricing and reimbursement. And for the pricing and reimbursement, it's the Federal Office of Public Health, which is responsible. We also call it FOPH or BAG, Bundesamt für Gesundheit. The FOPH then assesses access criteria for reimbursement, and they submit it also to a Federal Drug Commission. But the Federal Drug Commission gives an appraisal or a non-binding recommendation on the access criteria. And after that, the FOPH issues a formal written notification to the manufacturer in which it states whether the conditions for pricing or for reimbursement are met and under what conditions they are met. Usually, this is quite a lengthy negotiation between the FOPH and the manufacturer, and it's not in writing. It's by email correspondence. It's not a one-to-one interaction. And this actually can take months or even years until a product gets listed on the so-called specialty list, which is a positive list. And as soon as a drug is listed on this list, all insurances have to pay the drug to the patients if the conditions mentioned on the list are met. Maybe the system, we have quite a lean system or a lean regulation. We have for pricing criteria, we have only a therapeutic cross comparison and an international price comparison. And we don't rely so much on health economic data as other countries do.
Okay, very good. I think that summarizes quite well. I mean, maybe just very quickly, because you have as well just mentioned towards the end, I mean, health economic evidence is maybe just maybe a small proportion, if at all, right? I mean, we had also other discussion already also in the podcast show with somebody of the Federal Drug Commission, and they as well just said, if you don't have a health economic argumentation, maybe call it like that, it might maybe fire back. But if you have one, it is not a driving force anyway for a positive decision making. So is it, or let's say, are the key criteria really more the evidence base? And then, of course, as well, the two kind of, let's say, pricing reviews, what you have just mentioned with the price from abroad and the, let's say, Swiss-based prices in the indication?
Yeah, actually, that's the current system, or the law which reflects those two criteria. But I think health economic evidence plays an increasingly visible role, an informal role, you're right. There is no requirement to submit health economic or budget impact analysis like you have to submit in other countries. And having said that, we also don't have a formal HTA body or an independent HTA body in Switzerland looking at health economic data for new drug application. But what companies do more and more, and I think this makes sense, is they take the models which they produce for the UK or Dutch model, and they adapt it with local Swiss data. And this can support the negotiation with the FOPH, especially, and that's something we see. I mentioned that we have a Swiss Medic, our own regulatory body, and Swiss Medic often cooperates with the FDA or other authorities, Canada, Australia, and the UK. And that leads sometimes to far earlier marketing authorization in Switzerland than in Europe, which means we don't have an international reference price. So how do you set the price in a highly innovative field or treatment area where we don't have any comparator, no IR or international reference price? I think that's when economic modeling becomes particularly important. And maybe also when we look at the SGLT2 inhibitors, I think they got a reimbursement based because they could show that dialysis was or can be postponed. So even in a system where we do have IRP and therapeutic cost comparison, health economic models can be more and more useful. And I think it should be the future direction, and we have to work on changing the system so that health economic data becomes more and more valuable.
Yeah, that's really interesting insights. And I mean, to me, and that's maybe a link to what you said very early when you introduced yourself. I mean, it might potentially also be a kind of hint towards further cost pressures also in Switzerland, right? I mean, when I speak to clients or potential clients, I mean, a lot of times it's basically said, Germany is rich, Switzerland is even richer. So where should the issue really be? But ultimately, and, I think also in Switzerland, there might be some further cost pressures. Are there any kind of directions, what you see there as well? Any kind of further changes? You just mentioned, I mean, if there's no comparison with the prices from other countries available, they might also lean back a bit towards health economics, probably in a more broader sense than what we know and see in some countries like in the UK. But are there any kind of further pushes and discussions on the Swiss, let's say, direction, especially when it comes to cost pressure?
Yeah, I think that's complex and timely question. And knowing that the current Swiss drug reimbursement process has been in place for 30 years, I think there are lots of reforms going on the discussion about cost containment. Primarily, that is through price reduction of medicines, but there are also other measures being already implemented by the FOPH in certain cases, but the regulation is now being worked out. And one of them is a so-called clawback model, or what we call it a cost consequence model. And in this model, manufacturers have to pay rebates or refund based on a revenue a product generates. So this is a bit similar, like in France or Italy, I believe, with these price volume agreements. And other models or changes which have been informally or not implemented by the FOPH, but which are being worked out in detail for the law change, are price models and confidential prices. We have semi-confidential prices in Switzerland. And maybe one of the positive sides, not only on cost containment, but there is an early access pathway, which has been implemented by last year, in January last year, for certain or specific medicines only, and that should ensure reimbursement from day zero, meaning right after Swissmedic approval or marketing authorization. There is a lot of discussion on in the Swiss Parliament, and all these measures have been approved now, and the FOPH works on the implementation and exact rollout. We expect it in 2026, when everything should be clear and detailed out how the industry has to approach. And I think the most criticism, maybe if I may add a criticism from the industry, is that most of these measures have a singular focus on medicines, although other areas like hospital care and long-term care account for a lot of costs in our system, but they are not touched by all these political debates going on at the time.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I mean, it's probably a kind of direction what we know as well from different other countries, right? I mean, it might be easiest to go against, let's say, the industry, and just say, I mean, they are some of the, let's say, evil guys and persons. I mean, whereas, of course, I mean, some of the key cost drivers, as you as well just said, are hospitalizations and everything around it. So let's just see. I mean, as you as well said, I think the current ideas or soon to be implemented, maybe what we want to call it solutions, are, let's say, kind of price volume agreements, as we know those, especially since many years in a lot of different countries, including France, Italy. I mean, also Germany has now just implemented mandatorily, I think, roughly 2 years ago. I think it all depends, let's say, how it might be rolled out and how it's really, let's say, being implemented on the individual basis. But I think the overall context, right? I mean, by just saying maybe only focusing as well on the cost only is maybe a bit of more practicability question from a systems perspective, I guess, because you could as well have imagined, like Italy is also doing since many years, maybe moving there a bit towards a bit more complex kind of models, like value-based pricing models, etc. Are there any discussions from that perspective, especially when maybe also think about international reference pricing and comparisons against those?
Yes, I think the international reference prices, some people say that by using international reference prices, we already have some kind of value-based pricing because we import it via the IRP. Mm-hmm. It's like from Germany, from UK, or from France. Those are in our reference basket. But I think our current system has clear limitations with the TCC, and it has pragmatic strengths because it's easy, but it has the limitations. And I see actually two issues. One is that by using the IRP, where we already have a drug listed, and we come with a second one, we kind of import the high international reference price, which leads to increasing prices in Switzerland. This is, from an industry perspective, not so concerning. From an FOPH, yes, and that's why they started implementing all these cost consequence models or other mechanisms to reduce the overall costs in the system or of a product. But the more concerning issue is that when we come with innovation into the Swiss market, where nothing new has emerged in the past years, so we don't have a treatment comparison or only very old products at very cheap prices, then the system just cannot reflect the true value of the product just by the IRP. It means that we cut the IRP price by 50% if we have a low cost treatment comparator. And that's where our system fails, where we need more improvement toward more value-based pricing models. And this is something we need to work on and find solutions for the future. Otherwise, patients are left behind in Switzerland.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I presume it might be done rather stepwise, right? I mean, the first attempt, after, as you said, the system has been used for quite some years without, let's say, major updates, is now the implementation of the so-called cost consequence models, or rather kind of price volume kind of agreements. But even there, I think there are discussions how to best implement it, right? And which base you take, etc.
Yes.
But I think I don't know whether it's more important, but it's at least similarly important, right? To really think about those kind of, let's say, special cases, as you have just said. Where you have suddenly a therapy available where maybe nothing has been approved in the past, or just only really very cheap generics are, for example, available, meaning no innovation in the last couple of years. And that, I think, is, itself a kind of issue, right? Price volume still works also in those kind of areas, of course. But how to set maybe those kind of prices. And if you maybe think as well about some of those, 18Ps, like cell therapies or gene therapies, which maybe as well are primarily being used in hospitals, also outside of Switzerland, then you might even have an issue that some of those prices are not publicly available. At least in some markets, they are rather directly then negotiated also with the hospitals themselves.
Yes.
And prices are even there not available. Hence, you still have a further issue, right? You don't have any kind of basis at all. Nothing from the outside world and nothing, let's say, from the inside Swiss system.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's when health economic data is the only option, or maybe not the only, but the most important option to come to an agreement with the FOPH and look at the costs from maybe on a yearly basis, on a 2 or 3 yearly basis, and look at what is happening outside Switzerland, cross-referencing to other nations, and keep it a moving or an ongoing process. But it's true, it's getting access for highly innovative medicines in Switzerland is a challenge, and sometimes manufacturers I advise them to clearly look at all the details and really go into thorough analysis with the launch sequence also. Where do you first launch? Maybe it's not the Swiss first is not the best option. Maybe it is, but it makes sense to really look at the local details and find a clear strategy and look at pricing models and scenarios so that patients get access. Maybe one interesting fact we have in Switzerland is the so-called Article 71. This is the off-label or off-license use in Switzerland. So I mentioned Swissmedic approval first. There is this option where we do get access, or patients can get access on a single case reimbursement level for not licensed products. They get imported from the US, from Germany, from wherever. And the insurance, the healthcare insurance of the patients looks at the reimbursement criteria and decides on a one-to-one level if a product can be used in a specific case for a specific indication. So that's the beauty of our system, I believe. We do get access opportunities. It's only for rare cases, for severe cases where we not have treatment alternatives, but still for those patients, it may be of highly relevance to get access.
Yeah. I think that's a very interesting one. And I think that's maybe also where I think some companies are also looking towards. I think my understanding is also that, let's say with KV71, you basically need to have approval somewhere in the world. And of course, you need to be very specific on those, as you said, as well, rare cases, so something to be checked, of course. But I think the really interesting thing is also that this access, even early access, is a paid one, right? It's not just, let's say, as you have it in most of the other countries, giving access to patients and maybe even able to collect some data. But here you have as well the opportunity to really get paid by the system or by the individual health insurance companies in Switzerland, right?
Yeah, exactly. The process is the physician, the treating physician has to apply for a specific patient to the insurance. And we have around between 50 and 100 insurances in Switzerland. So it's really a single case application. He has to submit the data, and the assessor of the insurance, a medical person, assesses whether the efficacy, appropriateness, and cost effectiveness criteria are fulfilled. And then the company, the supplier company, has to participate in the cost. They have to agree that the patient can get access and that the company pays a part of the cost of the entire treatment. But the rest is, this can vary between 30 and 50%, but it can be lower if it's a generic or an old product, not a highly innovative new product. This is all regulated in the law. It's clearly set out at what conditions. And if the manufacturer agrees, then the reimbursement, the health insurance takes the rest of the cost.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. No, perfect. So when I would be a manufacturer, maybe especially, let's say, a manufacturer not having had a lot of experience in Switzerland, what would be your recommendations? What should manufacturers really keep in mind when preparing for Swiss reimbursement today? And maybe also there, especially with the evolving expectations around clinical evidence, maybe real world data, question mark, economics. I mean, whatever we discussed beforehand, but just in a kind of nutshell that people would just say, okay, maybe Switzerland is an option, but this is at least something I need to think of.
I think we have these three criteria: effectiveness, appropriateness, and cost effectiveness. From the effectiveness point of view, we are following a very simple approach. The FOPH wants to have published data in peer-reviewed journals. So that's what we have to submit. We do not have to submit any subgroup analysis. It's very lean. It's very straightforward, published data. So effectiveness usually is not that much of a problem unless it's an old product you're bringing to Switzerland with old data only. But for new innovations, even phase 2 data is enough if regulators accept it in most cases. And the cost effectiveness, I think that's a critical issue. And the companies are well advised to look at all scenarios. What is the current treatment algorithm? What is published in guidelines? What is available in Switzerland, which is mentioned in the guidelines? And what are the pricing scenarios? Look at the pricing scenarios, look at the clinical data. The FOPH likes to reduce the populations, not to the Swiss Medic approved population, but to the population which was included in the clinical trials. So inclusion, exclusion criteria are relevant. And then it's important to calculate the budget impact on a very rough basis, not modeling, but just what is the impact on the Swiss healthcare system by a new drug compared to what we have now. So my advice is look at the data, be transparent, also highlight not only the positive, but also the the weak points and then prepare for a thorough analysis and strategy for a pricing and reimbursement for various scenarios probably, and decide on the, if you don't have international reference prices, decide on the right launch sequence. As mentioned, not having an international reference price is a challenging situation where probably health economic data would be useful, not really requested, and there's not 100% guarantee that it works out, but it should be looked at and considered in the overall strategy.
That's perfect. So thanks a lot, Petra. That were really great insights, I think, around the system, I think current discussion, maybe as well an outlook, and of course as well a quite handy summary how companies could potentially at least thinking about the Swiss market as maybe another key market in Europe. Thanks a lot for your time, Petra, and talk to you soon.
Yeah, thanks a lot, and have a good day.
Another great episode on the Swiss reimbursement market today with Petra Erni, and I think the really interesting points which she was also mentioning are the current discussions, especially within the system. I mean, one of the things I clearly laid out were the price consequence or cost consequence models, as also known rather as price volume agreements in other markets such as France, Italy, but also since now more than a year in Germany. I think how those are really being implemented, those are now the discussions on a political level. And as she also said, these will then be implemented probably in 2026. The other interesting part was really also that she is anticipating and also thinking that the health economic evidence in a broader sense has also a more increasing role in reimbursement decisions. And there, especially in areas where maybe no kind of products are available really in the indication itself in Switzerland, and or also where prices from other countries might not yet be available. And this is especially maybe the case for ATMPs. I mean, having said that, of course, what we also know from other countries is whenever a new kind of, maybe call it item, decision driver for reimbursement is being used, as now with health economics, this is maybe the kind of leeway as well to the future. Hence, maybe health economics will have as well another and further impact on the Swiss healthcare decision making in the near future. Otherwise, of course, as Petra as well just said, it's a case-by-case decision by companies if and when to launch in Switzerland. That also depends heavily on the evidence structure. Having said that, most importantly for Switzerland are published data, but even there, the authorities are a bit more open for those kind of different information and data. Otherwise, of course, prices from the Swiss market, prices from abroad are key drivers, and finally as well the epidemiology. So the specifics of Switzerland as probably as well known in most of the other markets. That was an episode of MAP, the Market Access podcast provided by Mars Market Access and Pricing Strategy, which is your healthcare consultancy in the German-speaking markets. MAP is available every second week with a new episode, so watch out. And in case you might have questions, contact me directly and or visit our website on www.marketaccess-pricingstrategy.de.